There's 5 of these that
5.
underline feeling mad or sad or
anxious. Yeah.
And so if you feel one of those 3 things, there's 5 deeper emotions that are triggering those. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay.
There's always one or more, some combination of those 5 feelings.
Of those 5 core feelings.
We can't be angry, we really can't be sad, and we really can't be worried or anxious without one or more of those 5 firing.
Welcome. This is Dr. Gray Otis that we have with us tonight. My name is Aurora Nino. We are going to be going into chapter 6 on the book Key Core Beliefs. Diving into it, there's some incredible things in this chapter. First, we want to start out, how do we create a favorable self-belief identity?
It's a really good question. Our self-belief identity is a term that we use to describe our sense of self. It's how we see ourselves as an individual in all respects, good aspects and not so good aspects. Okay. But as you can well imagine, because we've been talking about key core beliefs, the biggest contributor to how we see ourselves is the accumulation of our positive and our negative core beliefs. And so we see that individuals that have predominantly positive core beliefs also have a pretty good sense or constructive sense of who they are. Their self-belief identity is kind of coherent. Okay. It makes sense to them. They're comfortable in their own skin, to use that old expression. By contrast, of course, people that have a preponderance or a number of negative core beliefs that are pretty challenging or difficult for them, that really does impact on how they see themselves and what their perception of who they are as an individual as they go through their lives. And it impacts everything. So our core beliefs act as filters, as we've talked about previously. Right. So what we perceive, how we think about it, how we react to that emotionally, how we make choices and decisions, all of this ties back to our self-belief identity, our sense of self.
That's good to understand. And it also is really interesting to see people as a whole and realize there's maybe so many different key core beliefs that are making up that person. But it seems as you're talking that as long as there's it's predominantly more positive core beliefs than negative, they have a positive self-identity. Is that right?
It's exactly right. Okay. And we see that people can change that. And that's a fundamental aspect of the work I do in my professional practice, but also why we wrote Key Core Beliefs. Right. Because people can come to a greater sense of, and have, I really like this idea, this sense of assurance that they are who they believe they are, and it mirrors up with their values, and they feel that they are moving through life in a very positive, constructive way.
That is really neat, because it seems like there's also room there where they're not reaching perfection, right? It's not every one of your core beliefs is now positive and everything, but it's just it's predominantly positive, and that can create that positive self-identity, which is really neat. Can you go into an example of someone that we can learn from that can help us really understand this at a deeper level?
Well, in the book, we talk about Mel's story.
Okay.
And Mel had it all. He was very well off, had a wonderful wife. His career is just skyrocketing, and had all of the toys. And then one day, his wife said, I've had enough. And she left him.
Dear.
And it came as a real shock to him that, wait a minute, what's going on here? Now, the real issue for Mel, from his own personal sense of identity, was that he'd been married before, and that his previous wife had divorced him. And so it looked like this was going to repeat. And in kind of discussing what the possibilities were, he talked it over with his wife, and she kind of commented, well, we have a minister by the name of Carlisle, and by the way, all of these names are fictitious, right. But would you be interested in talking to him? And so Mel said, well, yeah, okay. because he didn't want to lose his wife. I think almost more predominantly, he didn't want to fail at marriage twice. So when he went to talk to his minister, who had some really good educational background in counseling, he went with the idea, first off, to kind of tell his story so that his minister would agree with him.
It's probably the default of a lot of people.
It is the default of a lot of people. They want to prove that their way was right, and the other person, if they just changed. And in fact, that was one of the big issues with Carlisle. He just felt that if Lisa would just,
understand,
and take care of certain things the way he wanted her to, everything would be just fine.
Interesting. So, what was the reasoning why? He seems to have everything put together. What was the reasoning why she walked out on him, or was going to walk out on him?
Kind of the straw that broke the camel's back is that one day he went off to work and somebody was celebrating a birthday, and he asked Lisa to get a birthday cake and bring it over to the office, which she did. And when she got there, she could tell immediately by the look on his face that he was not only extremely disappointed, but also angry because she didn't get the right cake, and it wasn't decorated in the way he expected it to be decorated.
So it sounds like he's a perfectionist in some regards, maybe.
Yeah, probably. But the biggest thing was he had all of these expectations that he really wasn't communicating very clearly. But even if he had, he was constantly being kind of disappointed. And Lisa kept feeling this, that no matter what she did, it just wasn't going to measure up to whatever he expected from her. And this had gone on a long period of time, and she thought maybe there was something wrong with her. But she stumbled into Mel's first wife, and you can imagine how that went.
Yes.
But as Lisa talked with her, she found out that that's exactly how the first marriage went south, and that the first wife said, "I can't deal with this anymore."
Because so almost like micromanaging, almost.
In a funny sort of way, especially through the expectations, which aren't even expressed. I mean, at least a micromanager would tell you what the cake should be and how it ought to be decorated.
But it's just super high expectations and just this, you better fulfill everything that I'm thinking in my head.
Exactly. Everything I'm thinking in my head, you ought to know.
That's stressful.
I always like to say to the people that I work with, you know what? I'm not sure any of us ever passed with a passing grade, mind reading 101.
That is so true. And yet, all of us at some point expect someone to understand what we're thinking when we haven't communicated that clearly or effectively.
That's exactly right. And we do need to back up and, kind of say that what we really would like. Yeah. It doesn't mean that the other person has to do it. I'm not a real fan of the word expectation, but I do think it's perfectly all right to clearly state what we would like.
Yes.
And then give the other person the right to say what they would like or how they would respond to that.
Right.
So this story goes on because as he talked with his minister, Carlisle, he kind of got the impression that A, Carlisle wasn't buying his story. And B, Carlisle really had some pretty good insights. But first off, he really wanted to try and understand where Mel was coming from. So he asked to talk about his family circumstances growing up.
And of course, I'm sure some of his key core beliefs were coming from his childhood.
And they were coming from his childhood. His parents were a husband and wife, mom and dad, that really expected the best out of their children. They wanted their children to succeed. That's what all parents want.
Yes.
But Mel kind of got the impression that whenever he didn't get the top grade or didn't get the best performance as an athlete, that either his mother or father or both of them would be somewhat disappointed. And it would kind of be expressed to him, not necessarily that they thought his performance was bad or that he should have gotten an A instead of a B+, but it just came across to him that no matter what he did, he could never measure up. But what he did, that actually became very motivational, and he became a straight A student. He became a high school athlete that was setting records for the high school. And so this kind of idea that I can be motivated to really succeed just drove him. And he did well in his college performance and did very, very well in his career and just kept getting more and more success and more money.
So it definitely drove him to do really good things, but it's almost the difference of he was trying, maybe his parents were saying, hey, you know, you need to do your best versus I need to be the best. It almost seems like he had to be the person that was, I am the best. Almost that insatiable feeling of winning almost at all costs.
Winning at almost all costs. And he became really good. He was a very bright, intelligent guy. And so as Lisa talked with his wife, she found out this kind of commonality that they shared, that when there was something that was needed help around the house or something like that, he knew exactly what needed to be done. When his wife Lisa had a problem, he had the solution. And it became less and less of a partnership and more of this is what you need to do. And of course that gets translated into my way or the highway.
Yes.
And Lisa chose the highway.
Sad. Definitely not that equal partnership.
It's not that equal partnership. Now, there's one other aspect to Mel's story that I think is really fascinating. Because he couldn't be the best in everything, he developed the ability, you might even say the skill, to lie with perfection. Started earlier on when there was a high school play, and he tried out for the part, and thespian talents was just not his forte. He didn't even get selected for any part in the play, let alone the lead.
So for someone like that, I bet that was very crushing.
Yeah.
For him.
And beyond that, he didn't want his parents to know. Because you got to do your best. And if you do your best,
then you would be, you'd get it. And then you have to be the best. And he thinks he has to be the best. So he thinks he has to have the main lead in the play and be the best athlete and be the best student and be the, and.
Yeah, exactly. Well, at one point, his dad found out about the play, and he said, son, what are you going to be in the play? And he said, no, I was too busy with other activities, and I just didn't have the time to try out. But of course, he had the time.
And he did try out, and he didn't get it.
Well, what he found out from that experience was, first off, he was not embarrassed that he didn't get a part, let alone the best part. But beyond that, he figured out that he could kind of manipulate circumstances to his advantage if he just kind of, manipulated the truth.
Right.
And he used that whenever anything didn't quite work out the way he thought it should. And so, for example, we see quite frequently in marriages, and it happens, more frequently with men than women, but the guy will say something to have the woman do, and then she does it, and then he's not happy with it, just as Mel. And then he'll say something like, well, I told you that this is what it needed to be done. And the wife is saying, well, I don't remember hearing that. I remember you telling me that needed to get the cake, but
I don't remember telling the details of what it was.
Exactly. And quite frequently people will start down this road, and Mel started down this road to really become proficient. So he was never wrong. He always won. And everybody else lost until he realized that not only he had lost once, but he was about ready to lose twice. Because of the divorce.
And it's like you can win the battle, but you may not win the war. It's like seeing the difference where he was winning every battle in his head, but he was losing the overall. It's kind of like he won a lot of battles, but he lost World War I and World War II. Oh, I heard a quote once, and it was like, sometimes in marriage you can choose to be right or you can choose to be married. It's like sometimes it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they don't get the exact details right or whatever. It's like, just let it go.
Yeah. And sometimes we do need to let it go. And I think that begs the question, is it about me being right or is it me being an effective partner? And the good news about this story is that he stuck with Carlisle, and Carlisle helped him to understand how these behavioral patterns of his was triggered by some of his beliefs, his core beliefs. And he was able to work on that very diligently because he really loved and appreciated his wife. She knew what a wonderful woman. In fact, he knew what his first wife was, a really pretty wonderful woman. But he just wanted to have Lisa in his life. And so he's willing to do anything. And it took work. But the good news is it didn't take that much work. And he found that after a while, even though he had some ups and downs, and sometimes he didn't succeed as well as he thought he should, nevertheless, Carlisle was not about to give up on him. And as he got to share some of these experiences with Lisa, she decided she wasn't going to give up on him either.
Wow. How did they do, like, what was this core, change, or what did Carlisle tell him to really help him stick with it?
Well, a couple of things. First off, as you might guess, Carlisle worked with Mel to change some of his core beliefs. Okay. So one of his beliefs about him being dishonest is that his value was, I'm an honest person. But his belief it was, I'm dishonest.
And that means you are living contrary to that.
Exactly right. And that's where a lot of people get into trouble. Their value is one thing, but their behavior and their kind of...
Yes, they're living orthogonal to that. So that makes it really complicated within an inner self being.
So that was just one of a number of core beliefs that Carlisle worked with Mel to kind of say, okay, are you going to be honest or are you going to be dishonest? And Mel said, I've got to be totally honest if I'm going to be okay within myself.
Yes.
And that's a sign of what we might call real maturity.
Yeah.
But the other thing that Carlisle worked with, and we're going to talk about this in additional chapters in greater detail, but he got Mel to understand what was driving his feelings. Because, as you might say, a person that lies a lot is fearful of being found out. A person that doesn't have his expectations a lot met in the way he believes, oddly enough, in a funny, contorted sort of way, believe they're unworthy to be loved. And when Lisa said she was leaving and walked out, he really believed he was unworthy to be loved. Oh. So underlying these kinds of sense of who we are our emotional states, and under them are 5 emotional feelings. And so Carlisle really worked with Mel to help him understand in different circumstances. So he went back to the incident of the cake. Lisa shows up with a cake. Mel sees it. That's the perception.
Right.
Okay. And of course, his expectation hasn't been met, the one that he didn't clearly articulate.
Right.
And so Carlisle asked him, did you feel accused? And these are just feelings. They're momentary, emotional feelings that are underlying feeling mad, sad, and anxious.
Okay.
Because Carlisle recognized that he was mad, but he didn't understand how come. And so Carlisle is saying, now, there's 5 things, and the first one is, did you feel accused? Now, this happens in fractions of a second, much less than a fifth of a second. We can find out because of high-speed photography how these emotions play out. Our facial muscles actually change depending on how we're feeling.
Those feelings that we're feeling.
Yeah. So it's interesting research that's been there for quite a few decades. But at any rate...
but there's 5 of these that underline feeling mad or sad or anxious.
Yeah.
And so if you feel one of those 3 things, there's 5 deeper emotions that are triggering those. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay.
Psychology referred to the mad, sad, and anxious emotions in all of the words in the dictionary that describe some, jealousy is a combination usually of expressed anger, but anxious about somebody's, maybe cheating on me or whatever.
Right. Okay.
So psychologists refer to those as secondary emotions. We just call them emotions. Okay. They call the underlying aspect of them primary emotions. We call them feelings, just to distinguish, because they're very momentary and they are, like I said, in a split second.
Okay, and what are these 5?
Yeah, we got to go through those. I'll just say them briefly up front.
Okay.
They're feeling accused, guilty, rejected, unlovable, or powerless.
Ooh.
So we call these the GRUP feelings. A, accused, G, guilty, R, rejected, unlovable, powerless, U, unlovable, and P, powerless.
Okay.
So we went through with that. And, I always, when I work with people on this, I said, now, we can feel accused either by somebody else or we can just feel accused within ourselves if we're kind of accusing ourselves. And most of us, by far, accuse ourselves more than other people do. So we can still feel accused. We can feel guilty, and this is interesting. We can feel guilty when we're not guilty of anything. And we can certainly tie that to feeling accused. But most of the time, it's just a feeling that, gee, maybe we should have said something differently, or maybe shouldn't have done something. Rejected just simply means that a person feels like somebody's kind of either dismissing them, putting them off, they don't matter too much.
Right, putting them down in some
Yeah,
way.
exactly. All of those kinds of things. And unlovable is kind of like rejection, but I always kind of call it rejection on steroids, because unlovable ties in with people that we really care about, family members, somebody that we really look up to, a close friend. And when something happens in that inner connection between the two people, and they feel like they've been rejected, they'll convert that to feeling unlovable, unworthy to be loved. And we know how that key core belief plays out.
Yes. And that makes sense, because if you're just rejected, then that might be by someone you've never met before, you get cut off or something. It can be very distant. But to feel unlovable, you have to feel that person could have actually loved you at some level. So yeah, that makes sense, the difference.
It really is this personal connection that hurts so deeply.
Yes.
And then powerless just simply means that at that moment in time, we don't know what to do, or we can't do anything about it. And for example, if somebody says something curt to me, well, at that moment in time, that person can't take that statement back. I can't unhear it, and I'm powerless to do anything about what I've just heard. So what do I try to do is I try to get my power back. Okay, so going back to the cake.
To the cake.
Carl, I said, you feel accused? No. Did you feel guilty? No. Did you feel rejected? Yeah. Did you feel unworthy to be loved? And then Carlyle said, and here's how that might translate. If Lisa really loved me, she would have gotten me the right cake. And he said, oh yeah. And he said, finally, did you feel powerless? And Mel said, no, I didn't. Oh, maybe I did feel powerless, because here's the cake.
And I can't do anything about it. So,
yeah.
So that spikes that anger response, which then his wife, Lisa, right, then obviously felt in this dynamic. And this, like you said, this probably all happened within seconds.
Yes, momentarily.
Wow.
And for example, if a couple's having an argument and one person says, well, I just don't think you did what you were supposed to do.
Right.
Okay. Well, the person's going to feel accused.
Yeah.
Maybe guilty, rejected, unlovable, probably, if it's a close relationship, and powerless because they just heard what they heard. So what do? They get their power back. Well, if you just told me what you needed to do,
and then
I would have done it.
And
then the cycle. Exactly right.
Man. And to realize that this can happen in moments, but yet if we can understand these feelings at a much more thorough level, we can realize what we're feeling and how to reverse these.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, this is so powerful. People just think, oh, well, she made me mad.
Yes.
It's like, but why? And what was that emotion? That's a secondary emotion. So let's get to the primary emotion. And why was that a primary emotion? I mean, there's so many levels to this. If we can really understand this, we could solve so many interactions that go poorly.
Much more positively, and it does work.
Yeah.
But a couple of cautions. First off, again, these are very momentary, split second, literally, types of events that are going on. We say we process things through our limbic system in our brain before it goes to our cerebral cortex. So we process it limbically, emotionally, before it gets to our frontal cortex, where we go reason and logic. Okay?
Right.
So just to be aware that we can't control these feelings. They're going to be there regardless. The good news is, as more we understand them, the more likely we'll be able to regulate our emotions. And we'll talk a lot more about this in a succeeding chapter. But what Carlyle suggested to Mel was to go through on a daily basis and to identify 10 or more experiences where he was upset or disappointed or ticked off or whatever, and then to actually make a note of what that was on a 3x5 card or whatever.
Okay.
And then check off, did he feel A, G, R, U, or P?
To really dive in. What was feeding the anger or the
Exactly.
sadness or the, okay.
And then over time, Carlisle began to recognize, oh, now I get it. A couple of points that also go with this. And the first one is that as these feelings always must precede the generation of those negative, mad, sad, or anxious emotions. Okay. If I've worked with thousands of people, and we'll just take any incident in their life, and an experience that they've had, and then we go down. There's always one or more, some combination of those five feelings.
Of those 5 core feelings.
We can't be angry, we really can't be sad, and we really can't be worried or anxious without one or more of those 5 firing. Now, there are actually more than that, but for simplicity, this covers the bases.
These are the main ones.
Yeah, the main ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other one that's really important to this is as they generate those emotions, that's where those emotions come from, these underlying feelings. As they generate those emotions up, they also reinforce down our basic fear.
Oh.
And the basic fear is, I am unworthy to be loved. So the good news is we'll talk about later on how we change that. We always do. We always come back from feeling mad, sad, or anxious to a better, more reasonable state. The only exception to that is the person that feels a lot of resentment. They're in a low grade of anger all of the time. Oof. And we'll talk about how to deal with that too. But what was important for Mel is that he also were able to use these 5 AGRUP feeling states to better understand others, including Lisa. And Carlisle only had to work with them. For example, back to the cake incident. Well, Mel, best guess. What do you think?
What was she feeling?
Yes.
So after he was able to understand himself, then you also try to understand that, the other person in the relationship.
Exactly right.
Really quick, I just have a question with, you said he did it for, maybe 10 times a day. Okay, you feel this negative emotion. Let's drill in. Which of these 5 core emotions were you feeling? How long did he do that? How many days, how many days does this take someone to really change this in them?
Well, it's an ongoing process, but we like to see people do that for at least 4 weeks, preferably longer than that. We know that most really embedded negative core beliefs, they might have been there for 30 years, but they can be changed in about 7 weeks.
Wow.
And if a person's really working at it, they know it's starting to change after 3 or 4 weeks, and then they lock it in over the space of about 7 weeks.
Wow.
And then it's so self-reinforcing, as we say in psychology, that they don't go back. That's why it's never a temporary fix. This is something that really changes not only how we're experiencing our life, but more importantly, how we're experiencing ourselves.
Yes, yes.
And people just don't want to go back. And when Carlisle recognized the fear, when he recognized how these things were fomented from his childhood, kind of put it into a context, then he could really start to shift those core beliefs and move his life forward in a way that he didn't even have the ability to imagine before. But now he could see, no, I don't have to live this way. There are much better ways to live.
And he was given that understanding and the knowledge and the tools to be able to learn that about himself.
We call that the key skills.
The key skills, yes.
One of the most important key skills is understanding ourselves, because it leads to the second key skill, how we can better understand others.
And that is the core understanding of empathy, right? And that's what he's doing in this moment. He understands in this cake situation. He's understanding himself, and then he is asked, now try to understand her.
Yes.
So can you go into this, what this looks like as far as empathy?
Well, empathy, I like to say, is the key skill. And we'll talk more about that as we continue on. But we need to make sure that we understand empathy. It doesn't mean sympathy. It just simply means trying to understand the other person from 2 perspectives. One, what's going on. For example, what are they saying? What's the content? or what's their actual behavior. But then also empathy goes a little bit further, and the person tries to best guess what's the emotion behind the behavior or the statement, or however the person is acting in that moment in time. Empathy is something that everybody has. We see it in children. It's kind of interesting, and psychology put together this term, mirror neurons.
Yes. And this is fascinating. This topic, I think, is so important to understand.
It really is.
And it's powerful.
It is powerful.
I mean, you see someone smile and a person starts smiling because we're mirroring them.
I like it in the context of even little children before they can speak. If one cries and starts to be unhappy, there's a good likelihood if there's a little boy or girl around, they're going to start to cry too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we all have it, but some people it gets stamped out of almost, so that it's just not there. And for a lot of people, it's just not as well developed as it probably needs to be. And so in the context of Mel, because he was so focused on succeeding and on winning and kind of manipulating circumstances to his advantage, his empathy was driven lower and lower and lower.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So the good news is anybody can develop any skill. The most important key skill from my vantage point, as we've seen that work out, for example, in couples relationships, is this idea of trying to understand the person, what they're saying or doing, and then trying to understand where they're coming from as they say and do it. And the 5 emotional feelings, underlying feelings, help people understand that. And it's very interesting, as I've worked with people, and my colleagues have as well, people can not only very quickly understand their own mad, sad, and anxious emotions, but if you ask them about somebody else's mad, sad, or anxious, they do a really good job of estimating, they must have been feeling.
So they can pretty closely, pretty accurately, target what that person might be feeling.
Exactly.
Wow.
In working with couples, it's fascinating. So, husband, what do you think your wife was feeling in this context? And they'll guess. And then I say, well, let's ask the expert.
Yeah.
We turn to the wife and how well did he do?
Yeah.
And vice versa. We make sure that we play it both directions. It's not one way or the other. It's both.
Wow. And so Mel was able to get to the point where he could truly empathize. He was able to do this.
Started to develop that skill at a greater degree and was able to see how that could be so important to him. I always like to say it's like a person that's in sales. The really successful salesperson is reading the other person as to what they really want.
Yeah.
So they're not trying to sell them something that they don't need, or at least I hope not.
Right.
But they're selling them something that they're picking up on as
that
what they
person,
need. I have a friend of mine that's a financial advisor, been extremely successful. Why? Because he really gets to know the people that come to him for his financial consultations. And then he makes them successful because he's reading what works for them. How much risk can they tolerate? What are their desires? What are their goals? And then he marries up to that because he's linking into them empathetically.
He can really understand them as a person.
Yes.
Wow. We could all use this skill, I think, on a much deeper level, right?
I'm still working on it.
I feel like there's a lot to learn. And there's no better time to start than now. I think just like he's on a second marriage, he's in midlife, and yet he decided, I'm going to learn this. I'm going to learn this skill. And here it sounds as if it saved his marriage.
It did. Yeah. They eventually went into couples counseling with Carlisle, but it wasn't until she started to have the trust that he was really committed to this, and she started to see the results of it. And then she could kind of say, let's give this a go. And the interesting thing is, for the first time in their marriage, for the first time in either of his marriages, he not only had a friend, he had a partner.
Wow. That is really, really important, I think, for people to understand that it can get to that level. It can get from on the rocks, we're done, this isn't going to happen, to, okay, let's learn, let's invest, let's try it, let's be consistent, and let's be in it. And here they were able to be partners and friends, right?
Yeah. It kind of goes back to this idea, whether it's, regardless of how the couple got together, what their circumstances are, we wind up saying that about 50% of those relationships are sooner or later going to be terminated by one or both of them in some cases. But of that percentage, we think there's a very large number of them. If people would really start to really understand the other person and themselves, a vast majority of those marriages would not be saved. They would become the marriage that they always wanted. Because I don't believe in saving marriages. I believe in having really wonderful, enjoying friendships and partnerships so that two couples can really realize the best in themselves and in each other.
And in each other. Not just, trying to survive marriage. It's like, oh, okay, well, they didn't get a divorce. But it sounds from what you're saying is truly thriving in marriage.
Yeah.
And really making that something that you love being a part of.
Yeah. And, there are some couples relationships that just are not going to work. And it's not to say that all marriages, quote, can turn into these wonderful, over-the-rainbow type of everything is hunky-dory. But I think many of them can turn into being wonderful friendship partnerships. There are some where it's just not going to work. Right. And oddly enough, by the way, it's because typically one of the partners cannot develop empathy.
Wow. That is the reason why. Wow. That is interesting.
It's not true in all cases, but boy, it sure.
So it's not that the person is just so broken or they've had too much trauma or they don't have, secure attachments. It's that from what I'm understanding, it's that one person just cannot choose empathy.
Yeah. They just can't quite see the importance of it. And it becomes my way or the highway. And it just doesn't work. Now, there are other circumstances. I don't mean to be overly simplistic.
Right.
But if I had to pinpoint one key issue for things that don't work, I would say it's lack of empathy. If I had to identify one key issue why people are truly successful, it would be the development of the skill of empathy. We need to develop other skills too.
Right.
But that's kind of paramount.
That is, yes. Yes. And we are relational beings.
Yes.
And that is the core of relationships is empathy.
It really is. That's why we get into committed relationships. Yes. Really, we found somebody that can really understand us. We hope.
Right. Right. And that we can always keep working on that.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you talk about the CARE approach. I'm guessing that this is another amazing acronym that we can learn so much from. Can you dive into this?
Yeah. I must confess, I like acronyms, but they are good memory devices.
They are. And it works to really, keep things at the forefront of our brain, right?
Yeah, it really does. So the CARE approach just simply means that we're using the four initials, CARE, to understand ourselves and others as well. And we can use this a lot of times, for example, in couples relationships. So the C stands for I consider my own abrupt feelings. So how did I feel? Did I feel accused or guilty or whatever?
Right.
And I want to really understand that. Got to understand self first in a funny sort of way.
Right.
The A stands for acknowledging our true self. That's just simply who we are at the very core of our being. I use this example. If you were walking down the street one day and there was a person, and there was not very many people around, but that person stepped off the curb and misjudged the distance and fell down hard and didn't get up. Obviously was hurting. What would you do, Aurora?
Run to them.
Really?
Run in aid is like, you fell. Yeah. I mean, I would if they were hurting you.
Well, asking literally thousands of people that question, that's what all but two would say. One of them said, I'd probably laugh.
Oh dear. There's something about if they stumble and it's like they don't really fall and it's, they call them like the adult falls where you trip. But if someone was truly hurt, I think most anyone would hopefully run to their aid.
Way in excess of 99% of the population.
Yes.
Why? Well, that's empathy at work. Okay. And we acknowledge that that's who we really are. That if somebody was hurting or somebody needed us and we could reasonably do something, or even if we couldn't do anything reasonably, we would still want to.
Right.
Okay, that's the center core of who we are. And I always like to say, envision that with, for example, a parent that has a child. What would you do for that child? And the answer is, I'd do anything.
Anything, yeah.
You know, I'd give up a kidney for crying out loud.
Right.
I would
Right.
do anything if I could, if that child needed me.
Right.
So that's that second A, the second letter A, to acknowledge who we really are, our true self. The R stands for respond with empathy. And here we're doing our best to understand where the other person is. Do they feel accused, guilty, rejected, unlovable, or powerless? And this is a tough one. When we switch from being inside ourselves, what I felt, and who I am, to getting outside ourselves, to finding out where that other person is, that can be a real challenge. I know it has been for me on more than one occasion.
Right.
And so, but we do need to get to that step of responding with empathy. And sometimes that's taking me 2 or 3 or 4 attempts, because I usually get back and, well, but that person shouldn't have done that. Or,
yes.
you know,
We
what
get
was she
into the,
thinking?
but I'm the victim. So, and it's really hard. It's very hard to see someone else and really have that empathy if we choose that we are the only victim.
Yeah.
You know,
We stay within ourselves, and we have to get out of ourselves just a little bit.
Yes.
Okay? We don't have to sacrifice ourselves, but we do have to try to understand where the other person is. And this is, you know, I went through an experience that I'd held on to something with resentment for over 20 years. And when I finally got to this point of recognizing this and going through this process, I had to get to, respond with empathy. What was he feeling? And it took me, like I said, 3 different attempts. And then I finally got it. And when I got it, the lights came on.
Really?
I saw it entirely differently than I ever had before.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I bet that was
it's not
freeing
always-
in a
Oh,
certain
yes,
regard.
it was. And I can tell you how freeing it was, because I always got angry whenever I thought of this memory. And from that moment on, when I got to that next step, I never had any negative feelings. So the last step is the E stands to explore our mutual best interest. What would work for the other person and work for me? Well, this individual I knew very briefly when I was in high school, and long gone out of my life. I couldn't even remember his name, to be honest with you.
And yet he still had such an effect. on
Yes,
you.
he still had, I was carrying him around with me all that time, even in my subconscious.
Wow.
So I did explore what was in our mutual best interest. There wasn't much I could do. If it was somebody that I could go and apologize to, I could do that, okay? But in this case, I wouldn't even know where to find him.
Right.
So all I did was, as a friend of mine said years ago, I wiggled the web positively. He's out there somewhere on the cosmic web, and I'm connected to him in some strange way, maybe. And I just said, I hope things go well for you. And I hope I can be forgiven for my part in all of this, and that I can move on with my life, and that you can too. So for people, as I do, I believe in prayer. That was just like a 30-second prayer to wish him the best, and for also to acknowledge my own part, which I finally recognized when the lights came on. Now, it doesn't always work that way,
Okay.
and a lot of things are just simple. We'll never know entirely where the other person's coming from.
Right.
But the very attempt of going through that step by step and finally getting to that exploring our mutual best interest clears the slate. And from that point on, and that happened many years ago, I literally went through most of my life experiences that were negative that I could remember. From that point on, all of those things, all of those experiences, all of those people that I was kind of hauling around with me are no longer with me, except that I think of them positively.
Positively. Wow.
And whenever I have an encounter now, I work through those 4 care steps. Again, consider my own feelings, acknowledge who I am, respond with empathy, and then do something in our mutual best interest. And sometimes that's an apology, sometimes it's a nice note, sometimes it's paying it forward.
Yeah, I was going to say, what does that look like if you do know the person? Is that, you're reconciling in some way? Is that verbal? Is that if you know them, maybe it's, I'm just trying to understand, if you have a relationship with that person, is that a coming together in some way?
Yes, it is. In many, many cases, committed relationships, partnerships, close friends, family members, etc. Yeah.
Okay.
But sometimes we can't approach them, and we have to use a little bit of discernment because they may not be in the place to, for example,
To handle
accept an apology.
Right.
But we can still put a good thought out for them. And when the time is appropriate, we can approach them and hope to, like you said, that wonderful word, reconcile.
Okay. And what if there's a person, let's say that they are in the victim mindset, they have obviously been very hurt by, let's say, this other person. They may see that they may have done something in the situation, or maybe they haven't. How would that play out to their benefit? I mean, you say their best interest. Is that where you're trying to come to a win-win situation? Is that kind of what you're
Ideally,
talking
that
about?
would be wonderful. But a lot of times, like I said, they're just not ready to accept that. But here's the important thing. If I own my own stuff and acknowledge that, openly say, hey, this is my part and I apologize to you or whatever. At least we're acknowledging that we are taking responsibility for ourselves. We don't have to worry about whether they accept it or not. That's not the important. And many people will never have that opportunity or ability to accept that. But if we've done our part, most importantly, feel really good about who we are. 100% guarantee.
Because we're doing everything we can to help solve the situation.
And if we're sincere, and of course we wouldn't do this if we weren't sincere and genuine, then it's likely about 60, 70% of the time that somebody will at least get something positive out of it and may actually reconcile the situation. So it does work.
It does work, yes. And I could see how that could work, right? You know, if you're able to really try to attempt to understand the other person and then do something about it, right?
Yeah.
So you were saying, you had carried this for 20 some odd years. You're able to now go back and almost relieve yourself of these rocks that you'd put in your pack throughout the years. And it sounds like now when you go through a situation, you're not letting the rock even get into your backpack.
If it gets in there, I want to take it out really quickly. And I just believe that this is something all of us can do, and it's to our benefit. We'll talk in a later chapter about what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not. But this is a process that can be used in that context to better understand the other person. And of course, first off, better understand ourselves. And then, well, as you said, take the rock out of the backpack.
Right. And live in such a more freeing, happy, fulfilled way, right? You're not every time this, thought of this person comes into you and this triggering this anger or this resentment or this bitterness, like all those negative feelings have an effect on us, our health, our well-being, and to be able to be freed from that. That's what you're trying to help people see, and that it's possible, and that we don't have to carry around these things, for decades of our lives.
What you just said is exactly right. And this is why we think the second element of core related health is heart, health, emotions, awareness, relationships, and transcendence. Well, these emotions, as you just said, are affecting all of the other four. When we deal with them successfully and positively, I would say even from a loving, caring perspective, it does impact our health. It does affect our ability to see things more clearly, awareness. It obviously can have a very positive effect on relationships, even if it's just from our vantage point.
Yes.
And it leaves us more open to things that uplift us and, motivate us in positive ways in in a way that really is transcendental.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this. I hope anyone out there that really wants to change or wants to know that there's hope in a relationship that can change, that they can see this and realize that there is hope. Concerted effort over truly not a long period of time. We're not talking years.
No.
We're talking a matter of weeks. And if you know what to do and if you know how to implement it and really stay consistent at it, things can change. And that's just incredible to me.
It is incredible to me. I never cease to be amazed that people have these terrific capabilities to make their lives the way they would like their lives to be.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this chapter, and we're excited to dive into chapter 7.
All right.